So our topic for today is accessibility for online course development. I'm Karon Lee. I used to work for the CID as DL support, and I'm with SFU right now. And this is Betty Noble, and she's the department head for the visually impaired.
Anymore. I'm the instructor.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, and
I used to be though.
Yeah, and she's a user of accessibility, so she'll be sharing her personal experiences with us. Okay. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today is we're going to share our user experience, some of the current issues across both PCC and SFU that we've studied, universal design for learning. We're going to compare some LMSs, which is learning management systems like Moodle. Then we're going to go and talk about a bit of course design and accessibility and how we can move forward with faculty. So who we support with accessibility are visually impaired, deaf and hard of hearing, people with physical and developmental disabilities, learning disabilities, and mental health issues. The focus of our study is mostly with students and faculties with visual impairment, although we have been working more with students with language barriers, so ESL students and such. Okay, and then Betty is going to talk about her own experiences now.
Okay, so you'd like me to do that now?
Yes.
Okay. Stand up here and hopefully let me know if you can't hear me. Oh, Brady thinks he's going to participate here as well. I got news for you, buddy. You lie down, okay? There we go. So in 2004, we thought that one of the things that we would really like to do is to start using online courses with our students. And so we got all excited about it and thought this would really expand opportunities for our program. And what we discovered was that even if our course was quite accessible, it wasn't really usable. And part of the reason is that people who have lost vision often don't have very good listening skills, and they're used to accessing web pages how they used to access them. And you know, people who have vision don't really realize sometimes what a wonderful resource it is, because you can load a web page and you can immediately see the links are a different color usually from the text. You can pick out the headings and scan the headings with your eye and so on. Well, if you are totally blind, when you access a web page, the screen reading software, which is the software that speaks the information from the computer, it reformats the web page to look very linear, like a document that has been word processed. And while you have keystrokes to use to skip past links, or to find headings, or to find form fields, or to find edit fields, sometimes those fields are incorrectly labeled, and so even when you find them, it might say edit, but it doesn't explain to you what kind of text it wants you to put in that edit field. Or sometimes there are blocks of links so that when you use the keystroke to move past a block of links, you come to another block of links. And so what students find is that they get so frustrated trying to find the material that they're attempting to access that they just kind of feel like they want to give up. And that's really unfortunate. But let me just give you a little example. I had a student yesterday who was working on an online quiz, and she was using Internet Explorer 8. And so what she had to do was to hit C to find the combo box, go below the combo box and listen to the question that was being asked, up arrow to the combo box, press down, Alt down arrow to open the combo box, choose true or false, and then hit the plus key, which is what we call the PC cursor key, and then down arrow and up arrow to refresh the screen to see if her answer was there. And what she discovered was that after she'd gone through the steps correctly, it hadn't worked. and it just was like the combo box was still blank. So she had to do it twice. So every time she was answering this question, she had to go through the same process twice to make sure that the true or false that she was choosing had been correctly chosen before she could go on to the next question. So essentially it took her 2 hours to do a quiz that would have normally taken maybe a half an hour to do, or less probably, for someone with vision. And so it's that kind of thing that can happen. Now, I decided to try a little experiment. So what I did was I accessed the same quiz with Firefox, and the issue wasn't there. So the first time I made the choice, it worked. So I'm thinking, okay, we'll have to switch to Firefox. But those are the kind of things that can happen. And when you load a web page as a blind or visually impaired person, it's tedious, but what you really have to do is you have to listen through the whole web page to get a sense of what's on it before you can actually go to the specific areas of the web page. Now, you can set place markers to go to a specific spot on a web page that you revisit all the time, and you also have a keystroke to go to links that you have visited often. So there are ways to do all of these things, but it's just a process that it's not easy. It's time consuming often, and it can be challenging. And so what tends to happen is that students tend to focus on what doesn't work, and they get frustrated. So when things work, it's awesome. It's really, really great. And then students just can do what they need to do. And so sometimes what we have to do is sort of modify our approach. And when we found that some of the functions weren't working in Moodle 2, we had to go back to Moodle 1.9 where things actually worked. And sometimes we'll say, instead of using the Dropbox, put the file on your network or email it to your instructor, and we'll check it there. And so it sometimes means more work for the instructor as well, because instead of marking something in Moodle, you have to mark it just as if it were emailed to you. So it's almost like you're going backwards instead of forwards and using all of the tools. But the tools are there, and when a web page has been designed properly, or when a course has been designed effectively, then it can work for everyone. And I think if you take nothing else away from this presentation today, if you can make it work for as many people as possible, taking into account different learning styles and different abilities, then your course will work, and people will enjoy it and have a good experience and actually learn from it. Because when you're focusing on trying to make the course accessible to you, it's impacting your learning. And so I think what can happen is that students don't learn as much as they might if the course weren't accessible. And the other fun thing that happens is that PDF files are often made available. And PDF files work if they're text-based, but if they're an image of text, then you have to run the file through a scanning program, if you have it, and convert it to text, and then dump it into Word, and then look at it. So you can see it takes so much extra time to be a student, or even to be an instructor, when you have a vision loss. And just very briefly, although it's not really my area of expertise, the challenges for people with low vision on websites is, especially when pages are super busy, and I'm sure Karon will talk about this, is that if there isn't good contrast, it's really hard to pick out the things on the page that you need to focus on. And so some things can be done to make that easier. So I'm going to ask Karon to continue and talk about some of the features and accessibility issues that they discovered in their study, and how different learning management systems were successful or not in terms of presenting information.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Betty. That was very interesting. next thing we're talking about is the actual student experiences. We asked a few students what they thought about their experiences using online courses and what they thought was the accessibility of online documents. So as Betty says, a lot of the PDFs are inaccessible. And a lot of it is just the faculty are just not aware. A lot of, at the university, a lot of them just scan the textbook and they put in PDFs and put it on the LMS. And what happens is that they have to take it to disability services, and page by page you have to convert them to text and then send it back to the student. The other next thing would be the navigation of the LMS. So like I said, we compared 3 LMSs. Moodle is one of them, and I know you guys are still using Moodle 2.3. Is it 2.4? So different LMSs work differently with either screen readers or audio readers. So depending on what we found, some students found it really accessible and some didn't. The one that we use at SFU is called Instructure Canvas. It is not accessible. It does not have high contrast at all. It's basically a white background with gray text. So as you can imagine, it's really difficult for low vision students. We also tested access to visual and audio content. So these are for the deaf students. How the LMS is able to accommodate for captioning and audio that for in the lecture room or whatnot. And also, like in the lecture, a lot of times what they do is we have to get somebody from disability services, so they hire an aide and go there, sit with them during a lecture and help them take notes or translate right on the spot. Okay. So some of the solutions I kind of talked about is we do one-off processing for course materials. It's really not what we want to do. It's really time-consuming for the center to do. So we're trying to, it's basically we need to let the faculty know is be aware of this. And then hiring aides to accompany the students, either sitting with them to take a test, which has happened before. We use student response systems quite a bit, and so we just need to, it's not sustainable having someone to go with them all the time. Okay. So going forward, some of the solutions is universal design for learning. We call this UDL. And so it's the basic idea of creating all educational goals, materials, and that is inclusive for everyone. It doesn't matter what kind of disability or ability that you have, should be on equal ground. So why do we want to use universal design? Because everybody is different. Everybody has different needs, even people without disabilities. It could be a language barrier, it could be a learning disability, and so everybody has to have equal access to education. And this is something that needs to be addressed because what we're finding is people are addressing to the masses and not accommodating for individual students. So we have guidelines. So in 2012, an organization called W3C put together a set of standards that we call accessibility guidelines for websites. And I just sort of pulled a few of the more main ones to talk about here. So some of the guidelines you want to think about when designing websites or course design is alternate content. So the student cannot access it for whatever reason of their disability or situation, then you have alternate content. So maybe it could be going back to old school and doing a printout for them if they cannot read it, or translating it to Braille or such. Color and layout. So like Betty said, a lot of websites are pretty colors. We spend a lot of time making pages look pretty, but it means nothing for people with a visual impairment. Markup language, so this is more technical. So on the back end there's something called area codes or HTML, making sure that it kind of links with the screen reading software that you're using, whether it be JAWS or ZoomText. Sometimes there are markup languages that make it easier for them to go to certain parts of the site. Okay, plain language. So this kind of goes in with ESL as well. So making things so it's simple and easy to understand. So you can imagine as a blind student, if you're on a website and there's a lot of text and they're just speaking a lot of big words, they have to listen to that over and over again. So simple language works best for accessibility. Okay, and making sure that your assistive technologies are compatible. Like I said, we were talking about the browsers. There's been some issues where, with JAWS and Moodle, it works the best with Internet Explorer. For those of us most know, it's not the best one to use anymore. It's just large and clunky, and a lot of components don't work. But because the screen reader needs to use that one, they're forced to use that browser, and unfortunately there are some things that don't work with that. Okay. And another thing we use is labeling. When you're designing your courses, make your labels meaningful, and we'll show you an example of a course later on and how you could do that. Okay. We did a comparative study, like I said, with 3 different learning management systems. The one we used is Moodle 2.4, WebCT, Vista, and Instructure Canvas. I'm only going to present to you today with Moodle because that's sort of what you use here. And we compared the most common elements. So we had discussion boards, document repository, assignments, communications, meaning inbox, email, and multimedia. We had a rating system from 1 to 5, and we arbitrarily sort of chose it ourselves. So I don't know if you can see here. The first thing we talked about was discussions, and the pros and cons of the system. And next column we put is a possible improvements, and then our rating system. Okay. So what we found in Moodle was the sub-menus in Moodle is pretty tedious because it just kept reading it over and over again every time you mouse over on it. The advanced discussion features, radio buttons, and text boxes did not display properly. Like I said, we tested this with JAWS, and therefore we had to use IE. And this was done in the spring, so it could be improved by now, but we just found that things just moved to different spaces. Okay. The next thing we put is document retrieval. So how the students would get their documents, whether they be downloading it or displaying it inline in the LMS. So we found there was no audio feedback at all. So we didn't know it was a downloadable file. Sometimes it would just be another website that popped up and we had no idea by just listening to JAWS. And we found that it's just read the URLs. So it would, if you had a URL, it would actually read the entire thing, http:// all. And if you go over it, it's over and over again. So it just was a lot of waste of time listening to that. So what kind of improvement we thought would be just put more descriptive information into the documents. And instead of typing out the whole URL, just put the link. Yeah. Next we had communications, our inbox. We found that the messaging system in Moodle was actually pretty good. We was able to send a message and attach files. The only thing was the autocomplete option, where you can actually type in half the name and it should autocomplete. JAWS doesn't really like that. Okay. Do you have something to add, Betty? Okay.
No, I was just checking. That's what could happen. Partially works.
Yeah, for now, yeah. So a lot of people were waiting for Moodle 2.5 and see what happens. Supposedly there's a lot of things that are being fixed. So a suggestion we thought of is to make a separate conversation window. Now that's probably something to do with code. Maybe Moodle will do that, or if we can just do it, change the code. Okay. Multimedia. Now this is actually a bit tricky because as the browsers change a lot of times, and right now embedded multimedia does not work in Moodle very well, from what we're testing. So that is going to be that's a struggle. So possibly what we want to do is start labeling all the multimedia and using shortcut keys. So that's the best that we could come out with for now.
Is it better just to read rather than embed? Yes. And using YouTube. YouTube is it seems to work really well. Some other players don't have their buttons labeled very well and they don't work well.
So is there any other questions? No? Okay. So just sort of a summary, what we found the issues in Moodle were some of the web technology was incompatible. So we're talking about either browsers, could be plugins and whatnot. JAWS was reading a lot of unnecessary information, so it could be URLs, the address bar. It would go up there and it would read the entire address bar with all those funny characters. Your sidebars, menus, it would just keep repeating that. So again, it's repeating a lot of stuff, full URL links, as I talked about. So it's reading the entire link, and sometimes multimedia just simply not working, whether it be audio or visual. Okay. So next I'm going to show you, this is Betty's course in Moodle. It was originally designed in Moodle 1.9, and this is in 2011. I'm not sure if you could see, there's some stuff in gray. That's the original course. So what she put was every single reading was a different link, and the link was in line. It wasn't a pop-up. Okay. And it will say something like 4th week - Morley textbook, and then the name of the title. So you can see there's probably about 20 links on this page. Okay. So even as a visual person, that's a lot of stuff to go through to click every single reading, and you don't really know sort of the order. And so what we did as an updated design, can you guys actually see that?
The idea. You get the idea.
Yeah. So what we did was we consolidated everything. So it's like now there's actually just one link. We added a number so the 4 in front of the text is like the 4th week or module number 4. So for JAWS, it would work a lot easier because they have the shortcut keys and then just go through just that section. At least it just consolidates things down in that way. And so what we did was, say for example, one of these, first one would be, say for readings, what it does is actually pops up a different page. So this page here now you can see is just for the readings, and what we did is we put all the links within one page. So every one of those links is another pop-up, so there'd be a lot of pop-up windows.
And maybe I can just explain that, because the reason we chose to do it in a different window is because some students would use the keystroke to close the window, and they would close the browser and they would go right out of the course, and so then they would have to log in again, find their place, and it was really time consuming. So we felt that if they opened up a window, did the reading, then they could, if they needed to go back and forth between the reading and the course instructions for an assignment, it would just be easier to do if it was 2 separate windows. So there are 2 schools of thought around using a single window and using separate windows, because it is true that if you have too many browser windows open, then it can get really quite unmanageable. But if you do it in a single window, the danger is if you forget to use the back button and you use Alt F4 or whatever, click on close, then it's gone.
Exactly. And it also depends on the technology. Like for Moodle, it probably works better with separate windows. Some of the newer websites use a lot of iframes, and so it's a frame within the course, so that may work better with just a single window. Right? So some of the best practices that we recommend is, like I said, using plain language. So we just talked about the separate windows, ensuring that we provide captioning or alt text. This is something it's very simple to do. In Moodle now, if you put an image, you can actually just put the alt text right in there. So it shouldn't be too difficult, and it does make a world of difference for the users to see that descriptive text, because otherwise it just goes right over it. This is image.
What's the text? I've never really understood exactly what kind of text should be going in there. Can you describe what is going on in the image?
Usually a brief description of the image. It really doesn't need to be more than a couple of lines or even a single line of text that says image of a child throwing a ball
Got it, okay.
or something like that, just so that you know. Otherwise, what happens is the screen reader will say graphic, and you don't know what the graphic is. And often you want to know, and often it's helpful to know.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
And then we talked about using alternate sites. I mean, in the ideal world, you might have one site for the regular students and then another site for the visual impaired or any kind of disability. So it could be one that's high contrast. You might have less text on there, maybe no videos. Just sort a very text-based page. So that's the ideal world. Otherwise, an alternate site could be maybe just a website. It's not in the LMS, or like I said, it could be a Word document. So anything that enables a student to do the work as well, but not maybe using the software that is intended. We talked about descriptive naming, so all your titles, categories should be named pretty descriptively so they know exactly what you're talking about. So if it's readings, just put readings. Because what I find is a lot of faculty, they start putting other stuff in there that's not necessary, so simple is good. Okay. Templates. Some of your programs, I understand you used program templates, so every page looks the same. So when you cannot see it, at least you know what to expect. Like, the top of the page, you know to expect a banner, and maybe it's the learning objectives for that module or learning outcomes. So it's expected, and they know maybe a student can scroll down halfway, and they know exactly, okay, the activities are going to be in this section. Okay. And then pairing up with a buddy. This one is more so for face-to-face or blended courses. So if you work with someone who's, say you're a blind student, you work with someone that's visual, then they can work together and sort of go with their strengths and weaknesses so they can help each other out. Okay. And then Betty mentioned using email rather than Dropbox to submit assignments. It's just because the nature of Moodle at this point, it's not very accessible, and that's just sort of the only way that we can do it. Another thing with the file area, so this is more from an instructor's point of view. So create a structure. So if you're going to let the students see the files, put them in folders, so it's easier to find. Because we find a lot of instructors, they just put all the files in one area. And they name it all sort of funky and stuff, and so it's difficult to find with a screen reader or software. Okay. The next thing is we said avoid mandatory synchronous tools. So in a lot of just online only courses, you have to do like Adobe Connect or some kind of video conferencing for the course, and that Adobe Connect, one of the tools is a whiteboard. And I've seen this used a lot, and it's really impossible for visually impaired students to see what the whiteboard is, and for the instructor to type it, to describe it, is really tedious, and to keep up with it in real time is impossible. So that's sort of something to consider. And if you must use it for the rest of the class, again, find an alternate activity for the students so they can participate in as well. Okay. And then with the discussion boards, One thing is adding the headers so it actually matches the topic. A lot of times students just start changing the topic halfway and then it kind of gets blended in with all the other ones, so it's really difficult to find. And to avoid threaded discussions, it's just easier for the screen reader to just read a flat one than a threaded. But of course, for a visual person, you like the threaded discussion because it's cleaner. So there's two sides to it. Okay. So lastly, we want to say is how are we going to promote this to the faculty? So, we need to create some awareness and maybe an experience too. So what I've been doing is sitting down with some of the faculty in the year 1 courses, because there's a lot of students with disabilities that's needed, and have them experience what it's like to just use JAWS, just, as if they are visually impaired and not looking at the screen, what they see in their own course. And it's just amazing what comes out of that. They just are so unaware of it. And then they just change they do, it's hard to change a course for about 6 people out of 400 in a course. But it at least creating that awareness to the community.
Is JAWS just a free downloadable software?
It's, you can download a demo and use it as a demo, but to actually own it, it costs $1,100.
So in order to go through that experience that you just described, you could do a downloadable version.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
you can download a demo. Yes,
And
you can.
Yeah.
And of course, what you have to remember when you do something like that is that there may be workarounds that using the software that you're not aware of, but you can get a general idea of what's coming up and what it's reading and how it's reading it. And even though you can see the screen, and that's okay, you can visualize the kind of experience that a student would have using the screen reading software if you try to do certain things with it. So it's a good thing to do, to just try to see what will happen when you use it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so just getting the experience. Because when I first started, I had no idea. So I was fixing up Betty's course. So for 4 months, I basically worked with it as if I was a visually impaired person. I didn't look at the screen as I listened to the text that's on the page. And it just made me really aware and just think differently on how to design. So I showcased examples of accessible courses. I'm not sure how feasible, but we're trying to work with some of the publishers because there's a lot of ebooks now. All students trying to save money, and they do ebooks. And so having them to create the accessible version of the books as a starting point.
Can I share something about that? I'm now using iBooks and Kindle on my iPhone and my iPad mini. And most of the books are text enabled, but every once in a while, when you go to the Kindle store in particular, there might be a book I want to read, but it isn't text to speech enabled. So that is something that you do have to check for. And I'm on Ed Council, and when the college first got board papers, I got all excited about using it on my iPad, and it was completely image-based, so it was completely unusable for me because it was all an image of text. And there are lots of Apple apps that are accessible as well, but there are many that aren't. I just joined Weight Watchers, and I pay the same as everybody else, but I can't access any of the e-tools that they have because they haven't labeled them correctly. So it's an interesting world because a lot of things are possible, but they just haven't been done. And so you really do have to kind of test the things out. And the really cool thing with Apple products is that they have a built-in screen reader and a built-in zoom function that you can use to look at things and to test things. And you can find the features that work and the features that don't work.
Yeah, exactly. And so the last item we have is accessibility rather than accommodation. So, create your courses with accessibility in mind rather than trying to accommodate it after the fact. we're switching over from WebCT and trying to change what's already done in WebCT is really difficult. So when you have the chance and you're building your course maybe for the first time or updating it, take that opportunity and put some accessibility into it. At least be aware of that. Yes.
I think we met at the ETUG conference in
Sure.
June.
Yeah.
I'm taking my my MN in Ed Tech at SFU.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's very interesting is they do talk about accessibility, but they don't teach it. So, you know, they're covering off the bases. I mean, it's an excellent program.
Yeah.
They cover the bases. I think sort of like they could tick the box off. But most of us, the reason I'm here today
Yeah.
is because I don't know the intricacies. I know that basically we need to make it accessible when we're designing a course, but I don't know how to do it.
But what is accessibility? You know, to most people, they probably think it's just put an extra text in or whatnot, right?
No, I don't think that that's the case. At least certainly that's not my
Yeah.
interpretation. But it's the technical part of how do you do it,
Yeah.
and what is expected, what's required, and what is it like at the other end. Which is why I'm happy to hear that at least I can download the jobs and get it, and get some kind of
Absolutely.
because there's no one in our cohort actually understands how to deal with the accessibility issue.
It is, and I'm finding working with the Disability Services Officer up at SFU, they actually aren't aware. Because all they do is they just manually do things when the students ask them to.
So they accommodate it.
Yes. And that's something I'm trying to sort of change that view is, you know, why don't you just build it in? Because it's going to be a lot easier than trying to do it one thing at a time, right?
One thing that perhaps might be useful is to look at a website where they do have courses that are accessible and that are working. There's a Carroll Center in Boston that has online courses for people with visual impairments. The Hadley School for the Blind is a correspondence school. I would call it more blended than real online courses there, but at least if you take a look at that website, AFB.org, American Foundation for the Blind, NFB.org, National Federation of the Blind. Some of those people, all those sites don't have courses, but you can see examples of accessibility because particularly in the United States, they're mandated. So, you know, if something doesn't work, and even perhaps some of the educational institutions in the United States, I think have made a real effort to make some of their courses work well. So they, you know, they label their edit fields properly instead of it just saying edit, and instead of, you know, having a lot of hover links where different text comes up, and, you know, maybe they have their or they have alternate text-based pages for their information. Even Google now, if you go onto Google, has a place for you to click if you're a screen reader that sort of takes a lot of the mess, if you will, out of the page. And so, and audible.com has a different page for people who use screen readers, audible.com/access, that you can take a look at and see, you know, what they have done to sort of make their sites work. And they're not boring. You know, a lot of people think accessibility is equivalent to boring, and I don't think it is. It's just that, you know, sometimes you have to have a workaround, and you may want to keep something in the course that isn't accessible to as many learners or people with different abilities as possible. And that's okay. Just do a different, as Karon was saying, some kind of alternate activity that is accessible for that particular segment or group of people to make it work.
And I'm finding that when people are trying to do accessibility, sometimes it's not usable. So for example, the new LMS that we are using, it's called Instructor Canvas. They claim that they actually is accessible according to the US standards, but what a lot of users are finding is it's actually not usable. It's really difficult to use. So there is a difference between accessibility and also usability, so you gotta look at that side as well. Okay. So is there any other questions? That's pretty much what we have. That's all we have in terms of the presentation. So, yeah.
I just want to mention that at the library there is a computer station that has JAWS on it on the first floor. Yeah, usually it's up to the user, like you're supposed to know how to use it, but we do have shortcuts at the information desk. So if you guys want to give your course a try, there's a station that you can open JAWS.
Yes, that's good.
There used to be, but I'm not 100% sure it's still there. It's usually at the computer attached to the scanner. Broadway campus still have JAWS for sure.
Yeah.
Downtown campus, you should call maybe.
You can request it to be installed if it's not there, and IT will install it because we have a license for 30 copies, and we're probably only using 25 or so at the moment. So, and also we have a license for Zoom Text, I believe, which is the screen magnification software. So you can request to have the install, but both programs have demos. They work for 40 minutes and then you have to reboot, but it's usually enough time so that you can test it out.
I have a question about PDF. It's the first time I heard that PDF. I guess there's a difference between scanning a page that it's readable like a picture is. Does that mean PDF, even if when you transfer? Okay, my question is, if you transfer a Word document into a PDF, is the PDF readable?
If you say Word 2010 and later, I think, and it might even be 2007, has a feature to save as accessible PDF in Word as a file type, then you know for sure that it can be accessed, mostly. But if you have images included in your Word document, it's not going to magically change those images to text. So you might have to put in a description of an image or a chart. But basically that works. If it is an image, what you have to do is that the scanning programs have a conversion tool that will pretend that there's virtually scanning this page as if it were a printed page, and it makes an attempt to render the image on the page, particularly if it's an image of text. It can change it into text with varying degrees of success. It certainly doesn't always come out perfectly, but it can be done. Sometimes security locks on PDF files prevent it from being accessed by screen reading software. So you have to, it's a challenging situation, and you have to know what settings to use in order to make sure that the document is going to be accessible in PDF format. Some PDF forms work quite well if they're labeled correctly. Others don't. You can do forms in Microsoft Word that work quite successfully, but you have to go into the properties and label the different fields and combo boxes and check boxes correctly so that you know. Because if you're pressing the tab key or arrowing to a checkbox, if it just says checkbox and you don't know what that checkbox is to do or what it relates to, then you don't know whether to check it or not to check it. So labels are really, really key. And usually labels have to occur beside the fields or combo boxes or check boxes rather than above or below them. I think that's the case, although I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, sometimes because what the screen readers are using to interpret those things is what's called standard accessibility that's built into Microsoft. And so if it's not in the standard spot, then the screen reader isn't going to be able to find it or deal with it because it's accessing the code that underpins what's appearing on the site in order to interpret what's on the site using text-to-speech.
The Acrobat 11 can do, my experience has been a pretty accurate conversion from image to Word. Words. I found that it was quite effective. But also, when you're talking about locking, I've accessed PDF files for a project that I was doing with some skills organization, and they had locked it, and it was impossible to, even if you enable editing, you can't do anything with it, and that's a real handicap. I actually wasn't thinking of it as a handicap for disabilities. I just thought it was for myself. I could see where it would be a huge problem, because at least I can read it. I just couldn't manipulate it.
Yes.
And generally, like, if anything is clickable, then it's usually readable by a screen reader. If it's not clickable, we find the screen reader doesn't read it. Yes.
I have a question about alt text.
Yes.
Yeah, so I like the example you gave, like image of a child throwing a ball. What about if it's like a comic or a graphic? How descriptive do you need to be? Like, let's say it's a cartoon. Do you want to write like men saying, and then you write the script in, just so?
No, I think you would in that situation, you'd probably just say graphic of a cartoon, because you can't get too involved with your explanations. And obviously, if it was important to your course, you could, say, you could have a link that says, go to description of cartoon, if you really, and then you could have a text description. If you really felt that it was necessary and important for the understanding of your material, you could do that.
And that sort of goes with captioning as well. So now we're talking about for the deaf people, you can do captioning on the video, and for some people, I mean, that is actually a lot of work, or some people just put the transcript right on the page, or a link to another page for that.
And of course, there is such a thing as described video, but that puts another whole dimension into it. But sometimes you can get, like if you're using a particular movie in your course, it may be available in described format. So you might be able to use the described version. Or when you're doing a video, you might want to think about what you're saying as part of the video and describe some of the things that are happening as you go along, if it makes sense to do that. Otherwise, the buddy system works well, and as long as you can have another person who can describe what's happening, then it's helpful. I mean, I can even remember some videos at VCC Day and stuff, and everybody all around me is cracking up laughing, and I haven't got a clue what's going on. And so it's a way to be inclusive, to either find a way to have someone else participate and explain things, or find a way when you're actually doing the video where you describe what's important for the student to know, and some of the visuals are just there, but they're not absolutely crucial and essential to what you're doing. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Any more questions? No? All right. Well, you can always contact me if you're interested in giving my contact, or you can find Betty here at Broadway campus. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Betty, what is the audible.com website? What is that? Oh, it's a commercial books website for purchasing books.
Oh, I see. So, and you've given that to us as an example of how to make their website.
Well, if you look at their regular website, okay, which is audible.com, and you look at their audible.com/access, you'll be able to see the difference in how the information is being presented.
Great, okay.
So I think that's a good, pretty good example to use. rnib.org is another good site to look at. CNIB also, cnib.ca has made a big effort to make its website accessible, but it's helpful sometimes to look at something that doesn't work and then look at what they've changed to make it work, or what they've done to change it to make it work better. So I think Audible, I hope it's a good example of that.
Well, it'd be a good starting point anyway. Thank you.
There's another website that's quite interesting that you might want to look at. It's fairly simple, but it has a lot of very interesting links on it. It's asic.bc.cx. asic.bc.cx.
And what is that?
It's an advocacy website for people in the blind community, the visually impaired community, and it has a lot of information and links to different, different sites and events and notifications about what's accessible and what isn't, and what's being done to to make things work or change, make things accessible, that kind of thing.
And if you want to look at the standards website too, it's a W3C.
Oh, that one you're going to
Yeah.
Rita, do you have any other ideas?
No, I think you've been covering us with most of them. I think that's
Thank you. Very helpful.
Good.